Not likely to do that. Now, I think he made an exception for Gideon for the purpose that he had. Okay? But we need not to be a hard audience. We need to be available, have our minds ready for the Lord, to worship Him. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
And I want to share something with you about faith. This is something that should be growing in us all the time. And I've had learned some things about faith. But I remember back when my mom got sick. And it was about that time that we had an event happen in the holler. You know how that curve we have there. And this lady was driving out of the holler real fast. And the mail truck was coming in. So they had a wreck right there in that turn, the last turn before you go up to our house. So the post office said, well, we'll take care of that. We'll just discontinue mail on that upper rig. And so they put those boxes in. Now, my mom truly enjoyed getting the mail. She enjoyed walking down the steps and going to the mailbox and getting that mail. She liked that. And I perceived that. So at that time, when they did that, I prayed. And I just knew in my mind, I was totally convinced, I had never been more convinced of anything in my life, that God was going to fix that problem. I just knew that. And I remember calling Teresa and talking to her. I said, Teresa, this is not going to stand. They are going to bring that mail back because I said, that's important to my mom. And I know God's going to do that. Okay. But as it turned out, God didn't do that. She didn't get her mail back. And of course, she passed away without that. So that meant so much to me that I had to wrestle with that. You see, I felt let down. I thought, well, how can this be? Because I knew there was no way I could have believed anymore. Okay? So it caused me confusion. Well, were you really believing then? Did you really have the faith? Yeah, I knew I had the faith. I just knew there was no doubt in my mind. And you talked to Teresa, I told her, there's no doubt in my mind she's going to get her mail back. So it wasn't that. So I had to wrestle with that for quite a while. But anyhow, the Lord taught me a lesson through that. And I think and it's also when I kind of began to clue in on Abraham and his last great test of faith, to sacrifice his son. And it just kind of come to me that everybody at some point has to find or face, is there anything that if God chooses not to do for you, that you'll turn your back? Is there a price at which you say, okay, that's too high, I'm out here? And I think every individual at some point in their life will have to find that, will face that.
Yes. God
God will push you to that point. Okay. Now, God knows. Okay, just like with Abraham, I'm convinced that God knew Abraham loved him. He was going to do it. Now, when Abraham went through that process, the Scripture declared, as if God was speaking, now I know you love me. Okay. But we know that God knows everything. So He knew Abraham's heart. He knew that Abraham knew what. It's my thinking that Abraham was the one who didn't know for sure how much he loved God. Did he love Him enough to do what He asked him to do with His son? And I think that in your life, everybody's going to have to face that decision at some point. But anyhow, I wrestled with that and I gained from it. Of course, me and God worked that out. And I know that He loves me, and it turned out, that it wasn't my price. It wasn't something I was willing. And I've heard, and I don't know, I may have mentioned it when we had 9/11, and they started interviewing people afterwards, and they interviewed some people, and some people it cost them their faith. It was something that was too much for them. The price was too high. And they actually vocalized that on the interviews. They said, well, I used to believe in God, not anymore. That God would allow that to happen. I don't want anything to do with it. So that was their price. That was the price at which they would turn against God. So, I brought that up because I think it's important to understand that God's not going to move every mountain in your life, no matter how much faith you have. I know there'll be people say, well, yeah, the Word says if you have faith to that mountain, cast it into the sea. But the Word also says, Jesus in red said, they shall take up serpents. And in Matthew it says, baptize Father, Son, Holy Ghost. But we understand that because we rightly divide the Word and come to an understanding. So when he said, if you say to this mountain, be moved, you have to understand that there are some things you have to climb. So there are some mountains that God is not going to move out of your way. Okay? And that will be your test to see if that's your price.
That's right.
And we can confirm that by the Apostle Paul. You remember Apostle Paul's thorn in the flesh. Remember? Apostle Paul was a mighty man of God. He did miracles. As a matter of fact, he was one of them that got bit by the poisonous snake and slung it into the fire. But the Apostle Paul said he had a thorn in his flesh. He was certainly a man of faith, more so than we'll probably ever be. But he said he sought the Lord thrice. But God didn't remove it. So we understand from Scripture that God is not going to move everything out of your way. It is part of your growth process. You have to learn. Okay? And that's what that does. So there are some things we have to learn to have faith in spite of the fact that God doesn't move every mountain. Okay, and that's a challenge because you think, well, you know, how can I believe He'll do this if He didn't do this? And that's how you have to develop your relationship with Jesus. That's like my sister. Okay? My eyes tell me that she has an affliction. Okay? My eyes also tell me with everybody else that's got that affliction that it's a tough thing. But I choose, here's that choice again, I choose to believe, in spite of what my eyes tell me, that God's going to touch her.
Yes.
I choose to believe that.
Thank you, Lord. Yes.
And it's all up to us to choose.
Yes.
All right, I think I'm about ready to close here. Leave you with some things.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord.
But basically, we choose how great our God is in our life. Now, He doesn't change. But it's up to us how much greatness we allow Him to achieve in our own life. It is our choice. We can be like some and maybe not believe Him for this or believe Him for that. And He's going to be a little God. Just like the people of Nazareth. They chose not to believe, so they got nothing. So it's what you're willing to believe in that makes the difference. Okay? How great God is in your life is essentially entirely up to you. How much of your life you give Him. Now, whether He is as great as or as big as the God that created the earth, or as great as the God of Moses at the Red Sea, or the Hebrew children. We have a tendency sometimes to make our problems, our own problems we face, bigger than our God. But the Bible tells us, if you look at Philippians 4 and 6. So we were talking earlier about people are so tangled up, so stressed in life, and in so much turmoil. They worry about everything. My mother was a big worrier. You all know that. But the Scripture tells us here in Philippians 4 and 6, be careful for nothing. Be careful for nothing. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let